Prophecy occupies a very large part of the biblical record, but very few give the subject the study required for a true understanding. It is a sensitive area because many interpretations are given to specific passages relating to the future with an emphasis that is either unwarranted or in error. The most reliable clues to the study of prophecy are to be found by examining history. If this is done, it can be shown that the great majority of all prophetic utterances in the Old and New Testament have already been fulfilled. Others remain to be explained as future events bring them into focus. For this reason, prophetic passages in the Bible can be of the utmost relevance and importance to our understanding of current events. Isaiah, a high-ranking official at the royal court of ancient Israel, foresaw one such incident 2,500 years ahead of his own day. To us, it is past history, but not long past. This is the story of the capture of a city as birds flying.
It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. Pack up your troubles in your own kit bag and smile, smile, smile. While there's a Lucifer to light your fire, smile on, that's the start. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your own kit bag and smile, smile, smile. Pack up your troubles in your own kit bag and smile, smile, smile. While there's a Lucifer to light your fire, smile on, that's the start. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So
Number one gun, fire!
Paper! Great new offences! Read all about it! All objectives captured, thousands of prisoners.
At the start of the third weary year of the Great War, Prime Minister Lloyd George, anxious to seek a way to divert public attention from the frightful and seemingly unending slaughter on the Western Front, turned his eyes to the Middle East, where, under good leadership, if it could be found, lay a potential victory for the Allies. The Egyptian Expeditionary Force, under the command of General Sir Archibald Murray, had already made 2 attacks northward towards Gaza, neither of which had accomplished much, and the Prime Minister appointed a new general to take over command of the British forces in Egypt. General Allenby arrived in Egypt like a whirlwind, and it wasn't long before many officers who spent much too much time propping up the bar in Shepherd's Hotel in Cairo found themselves on the boat back to England under not quite so comfortable conditions in the trenches and dugouts on the Western Front. Allenby's purge of the dross was very thorough, and he inspired new hope and confidence into what had been a rather dispirited army.
I think that of all the commanders in the field who occupied high positions in the British Army during the Great War, General Allenby was one of the greatest. Not only was he a born leader of men, he was a most determined and resolute character. He possessed an extremely imaginative and far-seeing mind, and unlike many senior officers of the First World War, wasn't afraid to depart from the stereotype methods of warfare. General Wavell, Allenby's biographer, wrote, "Allenby had qualities of courage, loyalty, directness of thought, and purpose that would have made him a great soldier in any age and in any conditions." This, then, was the man who, in Lloyd George's own words, was given the responsibility of presenting the British Empire with a Christmas present, the capture of Jerusalem from the Turks. The British forces in Egypt were discouraged and cynical. They had lost faith in the higher command and in themselves, and were, like Israel of old, weary of the hardships of the desert. They were also weak in numbers, having received no reinforcements from home. To counter this lethargy, Allenby went through the hot and dusty camps like a tornado. Within a week of his arrival, he had stamped his personality on every trooper of the horse and every infantryman of the line. Seldom in the course of military history has the personality of a new commander had such an electrifying effect on his troops. This, in midsummer 1917, was the situation. To the west, the Mediterranean, where the Royal Navy had sea superiority. To the east, the endless waterless deserts of what was in those days Transjordan. To the south, Egypt and the British forces, and to the north, the enemy. Running up the center of Palestine like a backbone, the Judean hills, a considerable hazard to all invading armies. The Commander-in-Chief, Eastern Forces, Sir Philip Chetwood, and Major General Dornay presented Allenby with a very accurate assessment of the situation. The route to Jerusalem would have to lie up the coast as it was the most direct, it would have the close cooperation of the Navy, and it already had the beginnings of a rail-linked water pipeline. But enemy-held Gaza barred the way, and to the east, the enemy also held Beersheba, along with the precious waterholes. Allenby's plan was to deliver a series of left and right alternate punches to the ends of the Turkish line. The 21st Corps, under General Bulfin, was to attack Gaza, and the 20th Corps, under Sir Philip Chetwood, was to attack Beersheba, where it was essential to capture the waterholes before they were blown. It must be remembered that in those days, there was no question of overlanding your troops by mechanized transport or airlifting them. You marched, or rode if you were lucky. Some said unlucky. The Beersheba waterholes were vital for the thousands of camels and mules. There were 80,000 camels alone, and although they can stay for a long period without water, they need just as much as the horses and mules to start with. The attack started with the Desert Mounted Corps doing a 25-mile night ride in order to attack Beersheba. And on the morning of October the 31st, 40,000 troops were in position and ready for the assault. However, a single German reconnaissance aircraft happened to see all these preparations and hightailed it for home with this vital news. But it was caught by the Anglo-Welsh team of Captains Peck and Lloyd Williams flying a Bristol fighter and the German aircraft was shot down and destroyed. Possibly the whole success of Allenby's operation hinged upon this one single engagement by the Royal Flying Corps. At dawn on the following morning, a brigade of Australian cavalry moved off and captured the Beersheba waterholes just moments before they were blown. For this exploit, the Australian brigade commander received the Distinguished Service Order in the field from General Allenby. Royal Navy monitors, His Majesty's ships Terror and Erebus, pounded the Gaza fortifications with their heavy guns, and the attack went in. After a sharp but brief fight, Gaza was ours. The Royal Flying Corps at this time was very poorly equipped with slow and outdated aircraft, and the Germans certainly had air superiority. Well aware of this, Allenby asked the War Cabinet for 3 extra squadrons, which could ill be spared from the Western Front. Lloyd George, however, looked with favor on Allenby's campaign, and the more modern aircraft soon began to arrive, going into action almost immediately. The formidable Bristol fighters and the efficient SE-5A aircraft soon wrenched air superiority from the Germans, and the position in the air was reversed. At about this time, the 10th Irish Division arrived from Salonika, and after reviewing the situation, decided they weren't going to be left out of a fight. However, due to the everlasting problem of the shortage of water, the advance up the coastal plain was slow. And although the Turks had lost Gaza, their retreat was entirely orderly, certainly not a rout. Indeed, on November the 11th, they made a counterattack which eventually petered out without doing much harm. The British advance continued up the coastal plain, ably supplied with all the necessary stores by the Royal Navy, which kept pace with the army as they advanced up the coast. Lack of natural harbours between Gaza and Jaffa entailed offloading stores onto an unprotected beach, which, in heavy seas, could turn out to be a bit exciting. The further the army went towards Jerusalem, the more difficult became the terrain, and the weather was worsening. The Turkish army halted in its retreat northwards at Junction Station on the railway line from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and dug in. Although they constructed defensive positions, they were overrun by the advance of the 52nd and 75th Divisions, and many prisoners were taken. On the 16th of November, Jaffa, the biblical Joppa, was occupied by the British. That Allenby had advanced 50 miles in 10 days was remarkable, for the Turks were tough fighters, and the British supply column was getting longer every day. Palestine has been a very difficult country for the invader since biblical times. As Sir George Adam Smith said in his Historical Geography of the Holy Land, everything conspires to give the inhabitants of Palestine easy means of defense against large armies. It is a country of ambushes, entanglements, and surprises, where large armies have no room to fight, and the defenders can remain hidden. Before the campaign proper started, Allenby's written instructions concerning Jerusalem were clear. In an order of the day to General Chetwood, he wrote, "I place no restrictions upon you in respect of any operations against Lifta or the enemy lines to the south of it, except that on no account is any risk to be run of bringing the city of Jerusalem or its immediate environ within the area of operations." The advance towards Jerusalem really started on November the 18th. The Turks were now divided into two armies, one down on the plain and the other on the hills. The plan was to cut the Nablus-Jerusalem road to prevent any supplies being brought in from the north and to make a pincer movement round the south and round the northeast. A gap was to be allowed in the northeast to give the enemy the opportunity of escaping should they decide to do so. The idea was to avoid any street fighting within the Holy City, which would certainly have been very bitter and destructive. The 75th Division advanced up the Jaffa-Jerusalem road towards Ramallah, the probable site of the biblical Arimathea, while the 52nd went up the Vale of Ajalon, the scene of the curious incident when at Joshua's command the sun stood still. Advance units of the 52nd got as far as El Jib, the biblical Gibeon, where King Saul of Israel had his headquarters. December the 8th was to be the date for the main attack, but the problem with which Allenby thought he was faced, the avoidance of fighting in the area of the Holy City, no longer existed. The defenders had fled. On the 9th of December, the mayor of Jerusalem came out of the city bearing a white flag and attempted to surrender the keys of the city to a party of cooks of the London regiment who had lost their way. They then tried to hand them over to an outpost composed of Sergeants Hercombe and Sedgwick of the 2nd 19th London Regiment, who, unused to the politics of total surrender, directed them onto a group of gunner officers who were too busy to be bothered, as they were trying to get their guns into a good firing position for the coming assault on the Turks. However, the by now rather disillusioned surrender party managed to get in contact with General Shea of the 60th Division, who graciously accepted the surrender of the city, much to the relief of the mayor of Jerusalem, who'd spent the entire morning trying to surrender. On December the 11th, General Allenby, in company with his divisional commanders, entered Jerusalem on foot through the Jaffa Gate, scorning to enter like a conqueror, as had the Kaiser before him. Representatives of the troops who had taken part in the campaign were drawn up as a guard of honor: English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, Australians, New Zealanders, French and Italian. Indian Mohammedan troops were provided as a guard at the Mosque of Omar. A proclamation was read out in various languages guaranteeing religious freedom for all sects in the city. Israelite, Assyrian, Greek, Roman, Jew, Arab, Crusader and Turk had entered Jerusalem as conquerors before the British, but none of the nations can have been represented by one more impressive or worthy of his race than General Allenby. In his biography of Allenby, General Wavell recounts a strange saying amongst the Arabs: "When the waters of the Nile flow into Palestine, then will a prophet of the Lord deliver Jerusalem from the Turkish yoke." Now, curiously enough, Allenby's name, pronounced as an Arab would say it, Ali en-Nabi, means prophet of the Lord. And indeed, the waters of the Nile did flow into Palestine via the pipeline laid all the way from the Nile Delta by the Royal Engineers.
Although the Royal Flying Corps was grounded by very bad weather conditions during the final few days in December, which culminated in the capture of the city, the combined effects of new and efficient aircraft and the new spirit of aggression within the ranks of the air crew completely reversed the position of air superiority originally held by the Imperial German Air Force. The Royal Flying Corps absolutely cleared the skies above Palestine of enemy aircraft. How accurately this fulfilled the writings of the Hebrew prophet Isaiah, for he writes, "As birds flying, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Defending also he will deliver it, and passing over he will preserve it." And this you read in the Old Testament, written 2,500 years ago. To commemorate their part in the liberation of the Holy Land from 600 years of Turkish domination, No. 14 Bomber Squadron of the Royal Flying Corps adopted a new insignia with the motto, "I spread my wings and keep my promise." While Allenby's armies advanced up the Mediterranean coastline, Colonel Lawrence of Arabia, was moving up the eastern route, up the line of the Hejaz Railway, welding the capricious Arab groups into a cohesive whole. Lawrence's Arabs ride in, and their goal, Damascus, is theirs.
Well did the prophet Zechariah say that Jerusalem was to be, in the ages to come, a cup of trembling. But to those interested in prophecy, it is even more remarkable that 3 other Old Testament prophets foretold the precise day, date, and method by which Jerusalem would be delivered from the Mohammedan power 26 centuries before it happened. In today's climate of opinion, such stories would be greeted with the utmost incredulity. But let us take a look at these prophecies and see how they were so precisely fulfilled. The prophet Isaiah in chapter 31, verse 5, says that God in some far distant time in the future would defend, deliver, and preserve Jerusalem. And he uses a special phrase, "as birds flying." A curious way to write of the capture of a city. Thus, it is an astonishing link with Isaiah's writings to note that in 1917 AD, the city was, in fact, both delivered and preserved without any damage for 2 reasons. 1, General Allenby expressly ordered that no fighting should take place within the Holy City. And 2, that the Royal Flying Corps had by this time completely dominated the skies above Palestine. The Church of England's prayer book provided for the reading of that precise verse on that very day, the day of the capture of the city, December the 9th, 1917, 45 years before the event took place. It is also most remarkable that as early as 1886, Dr. Grattan Guinness predicted the delivery of Jerusalem in 1917 from the study of biblical prophecy. Can all these things be coincidence? The prophet Daniel records that in a crucial time, towards the end of the age, Jerusalem will be delivered after 1,335 years. If we take the rise of the Mohammedan power from its beginning in 622 AD, 1,335 years on, we come to 1917. An Egyptian coin of that year bears the Muslim date in Arabic numerals, 1335. But Daniel was deeply distressed about his country's departure from divine law, and he prophesied a long period of national chastisement and discipline, lasting 2,520 years. This chastisement began in earnest in 604 BC, when Judah was invaded and the Jews were deported to Babylon. If we use this date as a starting point, adding 2,520 years, we again come to 1917. Another coincidence? Even the day and the month of Jerusalem's deliverance was recorded by the little-known prophet Haggai. He said it would be the 24th day of the Hebrew month Kislev, which in 1917 fell on the 9th of December. It must surely be beyond reasonable doubt that these extraordinary prophecies cannot just be coincidence. If this is not mere coincidence, then it follows that Almighty God has indeed a perfect foreknowledge and control of all history in the unfolding pattern of his plan for world peace. The name Jerusalem means the vision or foundation of peace, and yet the city has been besieged 28 times in its history. But the Almighty always has the last word. So, in spite of all the age-long turmoil foreshadowed by this cup of trembling, he gives to us in the West, and all who pray for the kingdom of God on earth, a tremendous hope and faith in its ultimate appearance.